I like numbers. I like formulas. I like patterns. All of that is basically the drum as an instrument. You are building patterns. You can express something about yourself that sometimes words or sometimes images cannot. And there is a physicality of it, of course, with the drums, which is, again, with the ADHD, I'm always very active. It also works out very well. A thing that I only learned a bit later on in life is that you have to be generous with your time, with your ideas. But also, you can only improve, you can only learn if you discuss with people, if you share your ideas. When I started to publish this guide, some people came back with a suggestion and say, why don't you talk about AI? Why don't you talk about ethics of data? So I really like this dialogue.
Marco enters a city. He sees someone in a square living a life for an instant that could be his. He could now be in that man's place if he had stopped in time long ago. Or if, long ago at a crossroads, instead of taking one road, he had taken the opposite one. And after long wandering, he had come to be in the place of that man in the square. By now, from that real or hypothetical past of his, he is excluded. He cannot stop. He must go on to another city where another of his pasts awaits him, or something perhaps that had been a possible future of his and is now someone else's present. Futures not achieved are only branches of the past, dead branches. Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities was an assigned reading for one of the courses in my Information Design Masters. It's a slightly bizarre little book, or perhaps just more poetic than my impatient brain is used to. But I've also never forgotten it. It tells an imagined version of the story of Venice's most famous explorer, Marco Polo. Marco Polo! Apparently that game was so named in the US in the mid-60s, became popular parlance among expats in Hong Kong by the mid-70s, and then from there spread to the UK and beyond. And I can vouch for it having reached the southernmost tip of Africa by the 80s. Beloved explorer, and also just that guy from the swimming pool game. Is there anyone else with such an eclectic legacy? Welcome to How to Lend Money to Strangers with Brendan Lagrange. Daniele Forni, Director of Credit Insights and Intelligence at HSBC, author and pretty aggressive drummer, as I heard from your tracks. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brendan.
Daniele, that's a colourful career. So before we get into your two primary current roles, let's talk about your roots. What did your early career look like? And with all those various interests of yours, how did you end up in credit risk?
It's going to take a while to explain a little bit. I need to go back to my teenage years where I was a mountain climber. So I used to climb a lot in the Alps, and I did expeditions when I was like 16, 17 in the Andes and in the Himalayas. Those experiences made me think that there is something else in the world apart from my little town in the Alps in Italy. And so at university, I decided to study languages, and specifically Chinese, because I wanted to travel the world, I wanted to explore, I wanted to meet new people.
Yeah, follow in the footsteps of the great Marco Polo.
Exactly. Or Matteo Ricci, which is another Italian that in the 1600s went to China. And that brought me to travel across Asia, across China, living there, working there for a while. And after I just graduated from my bachelor, I found out that I really enjoyed economics. I always liked numbers, patterns. I always liked functions and formulas. I like the abstraction of it. So I decided to take a postgraduate degree, a master's in economics, and I went to Warwick in the UK. And that sort of like moved me from looking at dictionaries to looking at calculators. They're still languages to some extent, but I changed a bit the dynamics. And then, as any young person that is graduating economics, I needed to make some money. So I started in banking.
Yeah, and then that led to what's now, when this show goes out, almost to the day, a 10-year career at HSBC, spanning functions and geographies. So you're now, as I said, Director of Credit Insights and Intelligence. It's not a role I was familiar with within HSBC or any big bank. So tell me, what does your role encompass, and how are you helping the bank get better at what it does?
So the role is insights and intelligence. And those two words are a bit fluffy. They don't really mean much, And that's a bit the kind of my job, which is like a lot of many different things. But the way that I would sort of like translate it for people is that my job is divided into two areas. One is more like a project lead, so the classic program manager, where I have budgets, people, and outcomes that I need to deliver for the business. It could be, for example, the creation of a new analytics tool that enables people who take credit decisions to have better information. And that, to some extent, is a bit the insight and intelligence. So it's the delivery, the enabling of these things. In other organizations, you will find this role as a core strat, where basically is a strat or quant, but specifically for the infrastructure, the builds tool for others to use.
We've had decades now of fintechs growing, and almost 80% of the story of fintechs will always be told as the big established banks have legacy systems that aren't fit for purpose. And I guess in a way, you are making sure the bank doesn't end up in that position with a system that's 10 years out of date and no idea where the market is at the moment.
Exactly. And you are hitting the nail in the head in that sense, because I have been, to some extent, chosen for this role, but also I came to this role because I have a very strong business background. So I have looked at transactions. I had spoken with customers. I had a classic credit career at the beginning, but also very strong quant and project management. And in this role of there, sort of like infrastructure or core strat, I'm able to guide technology into what the business want to do. Often in large organizations, people in leadership position, they are there because they are good managers, because they're good salesmen, not necessarily because they know the technology well. So it's very difficult for them to make decisions. And my main goal is to translate technology and solution to the business leader so that they can take informed decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
The first half of my job is being a core strat, but the second half of my job is to make insights, to help making better decisions in credit. Usually my analysis starts with, did you know that this has happened? And did you know that you could do this to fix it? Or did you know that this collateral is not the most efficient way to handle this transaction from a capital point of view? So the infrastructure side, but also the usage of the infrastructure.
Yeah.
I learn by doing, and then I can actually go and fix things if they don't work as expected, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, but also really important because that ability to take that bird's eye view, I think, can get lost. Of course, some leaders of risk teams will be able to do that from time to time. But as we get more into AI tools and it's easier to drag and drop model building, I think there is this risk that you will have people running off on projects without stopping to think of those did you know. Why are we doing it this way? Have we thought of all the gaps covered? But of course, also probably very difficult to hire for as well.
Yes, it's quite challenging. Right now, I am going through a hiring process for some people. And in my case, I always like to have people that are technologically savvy because I can teach the business aspect of it. It's a bit more difficult to get somebody who has a banking background and then teach data science. As a matter of fact, every week, I think I spend 4 hours at least having teaching sessions about what is a derivative, what is a repo, what is a credit application. Because these young people, of course, they come out with master in computer science, master in physics. They don't necessarily know what we're doing. So it's important to add the context.
Yeah, and I think your background there with languages and, the formula side of mathematics are all inherently about logically getting from point A to point B We can talk about it in storytelling terms, but also in mathematical terms. It's that way of thinking about this links to that, and gives us our output. And I think a lot of quantitative people will perhaps even unknowingly have that storytelling ability and that ability to build a chain of logic. And I guess that's what you can teach is the vocabulary for that, the way of putting that in a business context.
It's funny that every time I go to work, and I go there like 2-3 times a week, I always have my pens in my pocket, because data and processes and system is all about diagrams, it's all about flows. And you need to have a visual aspect. You need to visualize them to understand them. It's very difficult just to talk.
And Daniele, an MSc in economics, a quant role first in Deutsche Bank, and then, as we said, a storied career at HSBC. That sounds like a sensible progression. And against that sort of backdrop, especially with the elements of storytelling and your love of languages we've already heard about, it wouldn't be surprising for most people to hear you had written a book on data science, until perhaps they heard it was a book of data science for kids. So talk to me about The Pirate and R.
Yeah, so I have a daughter. She's now 6 years old. And when she was 1-2 years old, I had this desire of sharing with her what I do on a day-to-day basis. So I was trying to look for some books, some things, some material, just to read something. I couldn't find anything that really was exactly what I was after. And so I said, well, I can write it myself. It shouldn't be too difficult.
Yeah.
So I went on Fiverr. I got an illustrator. I put all the structure, all the things together. And then I got the publishing company to publish it.
Yeah, and it's not your only book. You also do write books for us in the audience of this show. So tell me also, is it pronounced data or data, or what's the story behind that one?
Yeah, so for me it is pronounced data. I cannot pronounce it data. It sounds a bit odd for me. But that book was born out of yet another trigger. I started to go speak at conferences about credit risk and data around 2 years ago. And every time I brought a topic at these conferences, I realized that everyone had the same issues. Everyone thought that we had this friction between technology and business decisions. However, it was clear that there were not a lot of solutions for it. So I wrote the book because I started like as a diary, and then little by little it evolved into something a bit more structured. 11 things that large organizations get wrong when it comes to data. And I also try to provide 11 solutions.
Yeah, and Daniele, those books are available on Amazon. I see only $8.99 for Is It Pronounced Data or Data. I'll put the links in the show notes. People should check them out. But you also do write articles, and you said you're at conferences doing a lot of speaking. You have a guide for data strategy that's available as a free download in English and Italian. Not a lot of people go out of their way to put in the work to create a resource as rich as that, just to give back to the industry. What was the inspiration behind that piece? What are its key messages?
Thank you for calling that out. The reason why I wanted to share, again for free, this guide is because a thing that I only learned a bit later on in life is that you have to be, first of all, generous with your time, with your ideas. But also, you can only improve, you can only learn if you discuss with people, if you share your ideas. And the best way to do it is to first share your ideas. When I started to publish this guide, some people came back with a suggestion and say, why don't you talk about AI? Why don't you talk about ethics of data? So now I'm preparing a new one, a bit longer one, where I touch upon those topics. And by doing that, I'm also learning. So I really like this dialogue. And today with social media, with the internet, it's so easy to get an audience or people that can share your idea with.
You talk about the generosity there. There's also a fear or a nervousness as soon as you hit that publish button, and you would have felt it when you publish the books. I'm sure you feel it when you publish these guides. As soon as we make something public, obviously it becomes available for criticism. As you said, that can come back as feedback that really actually benefits you in the long run, but it's not an easy process to hit it and make it go live. But people that are thinking about doing something similar, This actually got you researching it. It's got you thinking, how can I create this into a fully formed thought? And I often feel with the writing or something like the podcast is that it forces you to complete that thought. And we are in a world where it's very easy not to complete thinking, just to half get something done and move on.
Exactly. And I really like how you said that just before you press publish, there is always a bit of fear of being judged, of course, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But at the same time, for the listeners here, if there's some ideas, I really recommend doing it because it's just the self-imposed fear. People do not really care too much about what you think. However, it's good that the people that really care about what you think, whatever they say, whether it's positive or negative, it will definitely improve you. It will definitely improve your own style, you'll improve your own content.
Yeah, just because I think at this point, people may be wanting to reach out to you to have that conversation or to see the work, maybe see where you're speaking. Tell me where people can find you, where people can find your content. But then I want to come back and quickly ask you one more question about that. But if people want to speak to Daniele Forni, where do they find him online?
Yes, it's very easy. I have a website, danieleforni.com. But LinkedIn is the main place where I post. I post every day. I try to be very active. I have a lot of opinions and I want to share them. And sometimes people reply with positive comments. Sometimes people do not care. But if somebody that listens to this podcast is interested, just send me a message and I'll always reply.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll put those links again in the show notes.
Thank you.
You're one of the top voices there on LinkedIn on data science and credit risk. So people with a broad range of interests should check you out. But yeah, I want to go back to one last question about the guide and I guess about the book. And that's this idea of recurring themes and problems that people working with data face, across the board. I think, we come from a world where we used to ring fence our data very carefully. And, the strength of our lending strategies often used to be the strength of our data. We would all use fairly similar techniques. When we're talking big banks, often using the same tools. And so it was our data and our unique experience of our data that made us different. And I think from that can feel like, we're the only ones who have a certain problem, or we can't tell somebody else we've got this problem. But you have noticed, the same things in different places. So talk to me about that. Is that the reality of the world, that actually we all have fairly similar experiences?
Well, I think we're all similar in the sense that we think about data in the wrong way. Going to be probably a bit going against the grain, but effectively, if you think about it, there is no company in the world, maybe just a few, that the whole business is data. No one really just creates data. No one really just handles data. However, every company, whether you're logistics, retailer, bank, insurance, your mom and pop shops down the corner, they all deal with data. You've got prices, you've got sales, you've got measurements if you are building a house. However, as you said, often in organizations, they try to put a silo around data. They say, I have a chief data office, I have a data function, I have specific data processing. And data is a bit like the blood of an organization. Yeah. It goes everywhere. However, because it goes everywhere, you cannot just silo it somewhere. Of course, you need to have some patterns, some standards around data, but every part of a business is to be responsible for the data. Often, the main probably complaint that I hear is that whenever there is a problem around data, everyone points the finger to somebody and no one owns it. And the reality is that actually we all own the data because we can only do our jobs, any job, only if you have data. Again, this is what I'm trying to do in my small world, trying to switch the paradigm. I want everyone to own the data. I want everyone to be responsible for it, not just raise an incident, give it to the data people, and they will sort it out.
Yeah, and I think it may be sort of stretching a metaphor a bit too far, but if we loop all the way back to that idea of language from the start, we can all have the data on our desk that we work with and we can feel like we understand it. But that data is always just describing a far more complex real life thing. And, it's a simplification of the real world. And we can see it in one way, but there could be nuance we're missing. And the more people that get involved in the data, the more we can understand it, the more likely we are to hear an interesting take on it or broaden our experience of it, our vocabulary, if we allow that. Again, I'm not an expert in organizational setups and structures, but I do really like the approach of having a team who sits out there. They're not about turning the data into a model in the way we've done it for 10 years, now just using more advanced tools. But we've got teams especially thinking about data more philosophically, more strategically, I guess is the better word, and seeing, do we have the tools? Do we have the data? Do people understand the tools and the data? Are people thinking outside the box? Do they have the capacity and the energy to do that? Is something that any people, any organization working with data should think about to get the full benefit of that. So yeah, Daniele, thank you so much for your inputs on that. Neurodiversity is also a topic that's very close to your heart. So as we close, talk to me about the work that you're doing there and what inspires that.
I'll try to highlight a couple of things because I could talk for hours, but I'm a late diagnoser in terms of neurodiversity. When I was around 35, 36, 3-4 years ago, I got diagnosed with autism and with ADHD. And that process of discovering myself or rediscovering myself, understanding how my brain actually works, was very scary, but also liberating, because if you have like one of these mental health conditions, often it's difficult to label, difficult to identify what actually you're feeling. Instead, when you're able to say, well, actually, I have that particular condition, then you can really find the helps and the support that you need. However, the flip side of it is that for 35 years, I lived probably a, let's say, suboptimal lifestyle because I was dealing with a lot of issues. I was dealing with a lot of problems that I could have had maybe an easier time. And I've been very lucky, and this is what I tell everyone. I've been very fortunate, lucky to have a wonderful family, to have opportunities at work, to be able to make a career. But at the same time, I feel that there are many other people around me that might benefit from my experience, might benefit from knowing that there is support out there, there is help, and there is really value in identifying what your problems are. And I try to be as vocal as I can. I don't want this to label me at the same time, but I try to mention it every time I go to a speaking event or at work. And what I really like about it is that many parents of children that have either autism or ADHD, they reach out to me, they just want to talk, because on the one hand, they can see that even though you're sort of conditioned, you can still have a normal life.
Yeah.
But also, often I try to explain in my own words how I feel about certain things so that they have a better way to, I guess, to understand their children. And this happens quite often, actually. And I'm very pleased to do that. And I don't, to some extent, I don't advertise that people can come and talk to me. But every time I talk about it, there is always somebody that reaches out. And I'm more than happy to help.
You've traveled the world. You work in a job that involves public speaking and dealing with people across the board, which for people unfamiliar with autism up close, those are things you would stereotypically think are unlikely to fit. So I think it does benefit to hear from you in that sort of casual environment. Just somebody can step up who's already succeeded, can show, hey, no matter what biases people might have or sort of expectations they might have about people with ADHD or people with autism, it's something that doesn't hold me back from achieving where you've got to. So yeah, it's a small part of the the bigger picture of how society needs to change, but it's great that that can be a part of the conversation there. Fantastic to hear that. Fantastic to hear what else you are doing in that credit and data science environment. DanieleForni.com, Daniele Forni on LinkedIn. As we said before, people should definitely go check that out. But thank you very much for your time and especially for dialing in from your holiday in Italy.
Thank you, Brendan. Thank you very much. It was a very interesting conversation. But I'll leave you with with an anecdote, which I found very interesting. I was at work and there was like a graduate from HSBC working in the same project with me. And she was young, 20, 21 years old, just out of university. And she comes to work dressed with boots, with normal trousers, or with baggy T-shirts. And I told her, I wish I could dress like you because that's very liberating. Right away, she told me well, you know that you can. And I was like, oh, wait a second, that's true. So from then on, every Friday, I go to work with a heavy metal t-shirt. And it's so funny how, how some reality, some things are in front of you, and you just need somebody to show it to you. And no one is better than I. Actually, people are like, I like the t-shirt, or what band is that? And, it's so liberating sometimes to do these little things.
And thank you all for listening. Please do look for and follow the show on your favorite podcast platform, and share the updates widely on LinkedIn, where lending nerds are found in our largest concentration. Plus, send me a connection request while you're there. This show is written and recorded by myself, Brendan Lagrange, in Brighton, England. Show music is by I Am Wake, and you can find show notes and written transcripts at www.howtolendmoneytostrangers.show. And I'll see you again next Thursday.